Good from afar, but far from good. Which is a shame. I like nice things. I appreciate high quality. It's an unmistakable feeling when you encounter something that's had the time and thought put into it. High grade. I'll be installing wide-body fenders to my 1994 E320 W124, but instead of riveting them on, like many other cars out there, I'll be installing them seamlessly, as if it was a factory option for Mercedes Benz back in '94. Using all my experience from the past few years, and my new standards, the work will be done with the mindset to last, unlike my BMW M3. Over a decade ago, I did the same thing to this car, but I had no idea what I was doing back then. I'm John Quay, and I'm still learning from my mistakes. I've got to find new ways to keep myself motivated. So let's use our imagination, and let's say I make videos of myself working on my cars for a living, a regular day at work. Let's pretend. Buckle in, it's a long one. Welcome to the mind. And welcome to Club Quay. Previously, I test fitted these fiberglass fenders to see what I was working with. I bought them from Classic Euro Parts, knowing they would need some work. It turns out they need a lot of work. The brackets to mount the headlights and indicators had been installed miles away, and the rears warped while sitting flat in the garage for a few months. I put them through a 145-degree bake cycle in a paint booth, which revealed a few air pockets, and the material buildup around the edges prevented any adjustment. I put them through all the tests to stand up to time, and they failed. So I've decided to mold the fronts onto the original fenders, and to cut a majority off the rears to mold them onto the quarter panels. But first things first, a bit of disassembly. Everything that I've mocked up in the last video will need removed. With the rears only taped on, and the wheels removed, I'll need to remove everything off the front end until it's basically just the hood. Don't ask why I removed the fenders before the wheels and bumper. I guess it was just my mood at the time. There was only a handful of bolts holding everything on, so it went by pretty quick. Except for that one pesky bolt holding the passenger headlight in place right next to the radiator. There's always something. One of the many reasons I've decided to bond the fiberglass fenders onto the factory fenders was to get the panel gaps correct. Once you notice mismatched panel gaps, it's hard to ignore, especially on a Mercedes Benz. Aligning panels should always begin with the ones adjacent to the quarter panels, since they are one with the car, a quarter of the car, and cannot be adjusted. I measured the gaps with a steel feeler gauge, which is all I had at the time. I wouldn't recommend using it, unless you don't mind scratching your paint. I've got a plastic panel gauge set to use once I paint everything. With the rear doors and the front doors good, I bolt the fenders on to match the front doors, using paint outlines from the hardware as a starting point. And finally aligning the hood with the fenders, using bump stops on the rad support, which definitely need replaced. Looking good? Feeling good. Now just to tighten everything up. With all the panels aligned, I'll need the stars to align, to come up with a game plan to make this work. It's not going to be easy to make this look factory. I'll eventually need to remove the front fenders to repair that despicable rust, but it'll have to wait until I've got them bonded together. Words can't describe how hard it's been for me to keep the momentum of this project. And I'm not talking about the car, I'm talking about the videos. I keep getting lost in the details. I always think to myself how I could have the car done by now and enjoying it as intended. Over the years I've seen so many project cars that end up sitting forever, and they always say life got in the way. Not to mention the extreme heat or cold in this garage. There's always something. Still beats working in a random parking garage or a parking lot. I need to find new ways to stay motivated. I don't have as much free time as I used to. And I'm no YouTuber, but let's pretend. Alright guys. Hold on. Alright guys. Thanks for checking out my YouTube video. If you like... So with all that covered, it's back to work. I began trimming one fender, starting with all the mounting points. It felt like revenge for the fenders not fitting correctly. And revenge is sweet. Oh yes. With a bit of revenge out of my system, it was time to remove the material buildup around the edges, so I could get them to sit properly on top of the metal fenders. I didn't want to remove too much at once. Removing composite material is much easier than adding material. With the bulk of it removed, I'll need to remove this lower curved section, which also prevents the panel from sitting correctly. So I make some of my tape measurements, make a couple cuts, and it's gone forever. If you've never worked with fiberglass before, it is the itchiest substance known to mankind. I found myself doing this constantly, and blowing it off the panel revealed all the air pockets. In time, these would bubble out under heat, but in this situation, I'm cutting all these areas off, so it's nothing to worry about. With everything unnecessary removed, I can finally sit the fiberglass on top of the original fender to see what I'm working with. There are two mounting points that I need to keep for the integrity of the fender, the bottom of the front and the bottom of the rear. I didn't want the front mounting point to overlap the fender. I'll be trimming it to sit flush instead. The rear lower mounting point can overlap since it's going to be covered up by the cladding, which is another piece of the puzzle that is a problem. A problem for another video. Despite my messy markings, I begin removing the bracket little by little. I don't trust much about these, but I'm hoping I can at least match up the curves for the indicator lights. I have to remove enough material to sit in this far, but to sit flush like this. Felt like a good job for the belt sander. And it was. But I kept finding myself switching back to the grinder. It was hard to not go crazy and just remove everything. But good things take good time. There's not enough contact area here to panel bond, so I'll have to make some sort of bracket to make it work. And finally, after much repetition, I got them to sit flush. I'll be trimming the outside edges to feather the bodywork when that time comes. Molding them as is, the panel would sit higher than the adjacent panels, which is not the look I'm going for. With it taped on and bolted on the bottom, I pressed around to find what areas still have contact before flaring out. Ideally, I'd like to have a 1/2 inch or 13mm of contact area to bond the panels together. Proceeding to mask off the areas that will be removed, using the yellow tape to get an idea, and then finalizing with the green. But then, having second thoughts, followed by sitting and overthinking, what path of green tape do I take? With a decision made, I got to it. I was kidding when I said there was a decision made. I still didn't know what to do with this area. I'll wait until I screw them on. I'm still not sure if they're perfectly aligned. Speaking of which, my next biggest concern was getting the body lines correct. Imagine if those didn't line up. I'd get a bit cross-eyed trying to find the top body line. It's easy to get lost while staring at white panels, so I sprayed some black paint over that area. Once the paint dried up, I used a sanding block to reveal the body line. By lightly sanding the highest point a few times, it should mimic the reflection of light that you would normally see. Cleaning off a bit of dust should help me out a bit. Going off the bottom body line and sanding the top line a bit longer introduced a new problem. Looking down the car from the back, you can see the top body line appears to slope straight down. I tried pulling the bottom in towards the front to add a curve, but this also changes the dimensions of the arch. I can't have mismatched sides, so I had to trust the bottom body line and the corner light section up front, which is why I'm so hesitant to cut that area off. I'll have to sculpt a new top line when I do the bodywork. Before screwing the panels on, I use aluminum tape to hold everything in place. It doesn't stretch or flex like other tape, which is ideal in this situation, and using self-tapping screws to get them temporarily mounted. Starting with all the major corners, I carefully screw them in. And with more work to do on the fiberglass, out came the screws and off went the aluminum tape. With the screw mounting points in place, it was time to cut the front corner off. With bodywork in mind, I cut the corner straight off at an angle, rather than a curve. It'll be easier to blend in with bodywork. Screwing the panel in by hand to avoid stripping, I finally got a game plan set for the front end, which was one of my biggest concerns. Now to do it all over again on the passenger side. Aside from prep work, coming up with a plan can be the most time consuming. There are no instructions and no procedures to follow. I never liked following instructions. I tend to get bored quickly unless some creativity is involved. So in this scenario, my procedure is removing all the excess material using my very precise tape measurements, based off the fitment of the front corner and the bottom body line. And let's not forget the spray paint tricks. If you stick around, I'll show you a couple of my tricks. It's nice to be able to skip a few steps on this side, but that doesn't mean it'll be easy. Which brings me to my next biggest concern, getting this side to match perfectly with the other side. They say, trust the process, but that's something I'll never say. My process always seems to change, depending on my mood, my aura. You know what I mean? Using a micrometer, I measured the distance from the original fender top arch to the fiberglass arch on both sides. And of course, they don't match. The driver's side was 10mm wider than the passenger side. Flexing the bottom got the arch out, but messed up the bottom body line. But you have to trust the process. So I adjusted the bottom of the driver's side to pull the arch back in, and then adjusted the passenger side to match. Bingo! With that bit of CQ quality control taken care of, I aluminum taped it in place and screwed the fender on, along with new adjustments to the driver's side. Using measurements I made the first time around, I cut the remaining bits off the passenger side. And somehow I made it this far without checking the fender to ground measurements. I don't trust that this ground is perfectly level, so I compared the inner fender to the outer fender. This is when a car bench would come in handy, but I definitely don't have one of those laying around. And by pure luck, or the fact that all other factors checked out, they actually matched. With the final CQQC complete, I used the yellow 3M tape to mask the outside of where the panels are mounted. I'll need to establish a line where the panels will bond to the original fenders. Masking out the bond line with 3M's green 18mm tape, which is a perfect amount of contact area. This will help me keep the upcoming prep work clean and organized. And it's nice to see some color. And now to plan out what area of the original fenders will be cut out. I want to cut out as much as possible, but leave enough metal so I can mount new fender liners that I'll have to make from scratch. After thinking about my entire life a couple times, I decided to start above the front mounting bracket, which enables a location for my new brackets that I haven't even made yet. Go across the top body line, leave about 3 inches of space from the bond line up front, matching that angle and doing a nice curve. It's all about the nice curves. And for the rear of the fender, spacing about 4 inches away from the bond line, going straight up with another nice curve. It's beautiful, elegant. I love it. I'll hold off from cutting any metal until I get the other game plan sorted out. Before I start working on the rear of the car, there's more disassembly that I've been putting off. Removing the rocker panel, the rear bumper, and the cladding, also known as the Sacco panels, named after Bruno Sacco, the Italian auto designer, the one responsible for this iconic two-tone style.
Italian style, no? Italian style.
The rocker panels are pretty simple to remove, but there are a bunch of sneaky bolts hidden behind a rubber seal. I'm never a fan of removing anything that's fastened with plastic clips. They always break, especially on older cars. The cladding has clips that pull out from the bottom, but the top clips slide out. The fronts slide back, and the rears slide forward, which is something you probably wouldn't know until after you've broken them. And I broke a few, and that's how I know. Hopefully, they're still manufactured. On a positive note, I love how easy it is to remove the bumpers on these cars. Just a handful of 13mm bolts. So the fronts required some problem solving to sort out. They had their issues. But the rears have very unique and special issues. I'll need to use my imagination for these. The section that's intended to hang inside the jamb needs removed, since it closes up the door's panel gap. With that area removed, I can start the test fitting and trimming process. I may have removed a bit too much here. I think I got a little too excited. I intentionally let the rear panels warp naturally. It's important to have any composite issue happen before any paint or bodywork is done, or it will happen eventually later on, but it definitely made things difficult for test fitting. The panels wanted nothing to do with sitting in place. Similar to the fronts, there's a mounting point that plays an important role on the dimensions of the fender. In a similar fashion, I masked off the area to be cut, leaving myself a bit extra room to be safe. They say measure twice, cut once. I measured many times, and cut many times. But in the end, I got it matching to the opposite side with the mounting point fully intact and overlapping as intended. It's really important I make the right moves to make this stay in place. And this is where the imagination comes in. A majority of this panel has contact with the quarter panel. I have to come up with a shape that I can make disappear with bodywork and a little magic. In this situation, I need to make space near the top of the door and the top body line. That way I have room to feather out the bodywork. Also removing that hard angle that has no business being there. Look familiar to anyone? A very similar shape to the 190 Evo 2's flared rear arches. But you won't know they're there after I do the bodywork. If I ever get to that point, I'm definitely concerned with this warping. It wants nothing to do with laying flat. This is another section I'm very excited to remove, because it's been so annoying. I then use the scraps of annoyance as a template for the other side. And of course, this side is shorter than the driver's side. Not the worst situation, right now I'm more concerned with the curve. How do you like me now? I then sat both sides next to each other to match them perfectly. which was very satisfying. I then trimmed the inner arch to give myself a bit more wheel clearance. And for my next biggest concern, the idea that 90% of these warped panels will be bonded to the car more or less with an epoxy glue and nothing else, which is scary. The fronts at least have corners and edges to bite onto, where these will only have a bracket that I haven't even made yet. With the aluminum tape on, I do many more measurements, again making sure the distance away from the original arches match up, and the distance from the arches to the ground. Once I cut the original arch, there's no going back. No realistic way of knowing both sides match evenly. Everything checks out, and the self-tapping screws go in, spacing them closer together to keep them in check. I'll just have more holes to fill in later. Know what I mean? I'll have to cut up the rear arches, creating space necessary for the wider wheels and tires, and then welding the opening back together. A bit of nip-tuck. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking. I want to cut them at the inner wheel well's highest point, which I found just by doing some hand measurements. Marking that point, then using the blue fine line to mask out what I thought looked legit. But I was wrong, which I didn't realize at the time. I was so concerned with cutting too much. I can't replace these like the front fenders by removing a handful of bolts. The quarter panels really are a quarter of the car. They are one with the chassis, the roof, the structure of the car. This is exactly why converting a car into a wide body is the worst modification. A car killer. But I'm here to tastefully modify cars to a factory finish, using my hands. You know what I mean. And I'll justify it as something acceptable by saying, my quarter panels were already in rough shape. It's even had a sticker clear coated over from a bad repair at some point. You can justify just about anything if you really wanted to. Feeling intimidated by cutting up the quarter panels, so I hyped myself up by cutting the fronts first. Easily replaced. So forgiving. The reason I cut this exact shape out of these front fenders was to possibly weld them onto the rear and ditch the warped fiberglass. Trying out both sides, the shape of the right side matched up to the left quarter surprisingly well. The back just needed to come out a bit. I cut off the lower half to get a better idea, and painfully drilled more holes into the quarter panel. Right away, I saw a huge turnoff. The angle it slopes out was too long and mellow, but I kept going and trimmed the dogleg portion off. Otherwise I'd have to do body work on the back of the rear door, and more towards the custom look, which is a hard pass for me. I then proceeded to hammer that section to transition out from the door. It started to look the part, but I was ignoring the fact that the overall length of the front arch was about an inch shorter than the rear, and that bubble shape of the flare just looked so cheap and quite embarrassing. I really wanted a good excuse to make this work. I wanted to practice the metal fabrication side of things. I wanted to fab it up. Instead, I just took a few hours of my time and these remains to the scrap pile of annoyance. With procrastination out of my system, it was finally time to cut up my Mercedes Benz, potentially ruining the car forever. I guess this is the point where I say, there's no turning back now. A toast to the Purists. Forgive me, for I have sinned. It's always easier after that first jump. Something I learned as a kid. After removing a sliver of the arch, exposing the inner structure of the quarter panel, it's really important to join this area back together. You definitely don't want to mess with structural integrity. And it's good practice to make sure there's a load applied to the rear suspension doing any work like this. If you don't, there's a chance the entire section could sag. And you wouldn't notice until the work is done and the car's back on the ground. Botched surgery. I'm no doctor, but with my Mercedes, let's pretend. Rather than cutting the intersection to match, I'll remove the lip of the arch. And hammer the entire section up into place. Which was awkward, trying to swing a big hammer upwards without hitting the suspension, which is still in place. The metal has to stretch to reach the outside. Once I hit one side up, the opposite side would go down. So it took several awkward hammer swings. But once they eventually made contact, I trimmed the excess metal. And grinded them flush. The many holes that I've drilled will need welded shut, so I grinded the paint off to get them ready, followed by removing the factory seam sealer, a very messy part of the procedure. It's basically a rubberized glue that's used on seams to prevent from any corrosion. In order to weld these sections together, I'll need about an inch of clean bare metal. And with the prep work done, I felt cleaning up was a good way to reset. I finally got my hands on something to give myself new opportunities. A new door unlocked. A MIG welder, the Hobart Handler 140. Nothing special, however, a relatively cheap option that plugs into a 120 volt outlet. I'm definitely no professional at this. There are classes out there to learn how to weld properly, but I took the same approach as I did with painting, a bit of trial and error. There are different settings for different thickness of metal. Setting up the machine for 18 gauge steel, intentionally holding the trigger too long, making things too hot, burning holes in the metal, and pulling it too quickly, resulting in nothing at all. You gotta find the sweet spot. Welding thin steel can be tricky. Getting the panel too hot will cause warping, so it's a game of tacking a spot and welding different areas until the previous welds cool down, which is difficult. It's easy to get impatient. I'm no tough guy, but now that I'm attempting to weld, let's pretend. I got slightly impatient on the driver's side. Things got too hot, and it warped a bit. It's not a big deal because it'll never be seen. It's not ideal. But I like pushing the limits to see what the tipping point is. Something you should know about me. So I'll just take it as a lesson learned, along with all the holes I had to close up. MIG welding thin metal doesn't come out as gratifying as TIG welding, especially with my beginner status. But again, that's okay. That's what the grinder is for. While I was at it, I decided to shave the antenna, aka removing it as if it was never there. Although it's a period correct look, mine no longer works, and I'm no fan of the remote control car look that it brings. Using scrap metal from the front fenders, I made a template to cut out the shape to fill the hole. Grinding it down until it fit perfectly. Seems to be a reoccurring theme here. Using magnets inside to keep it in place, welding it in, and grinding it smooth, as if it was never there. With the experience acquired from the driver's side, I make moves over to the passenger side, tack welding opposite sides, a few in between, and then hammering up the gaps to tighten up the panel. Setting this rhythm on repeat, I took my time. and it shows. After grinding the weld smooth, there was no warping, no disappointment. Except for the fact I should have cut the entire arch up to its highest points, instead of just the top portion. I would hate to do all this work and have the tires rub because I didn't cut enough. I was so concerned that I would cut too much that I managed to overlook this. I'll justify it by saying I could still use more practice. So I did that entire process all over again. Cutting, hammering, and welding the front and the rear of the arch to its highest points. No matter how I slice it, it's definitely a setback. But if it's not right, it needs redone. More practice. In the end, I was content with the final results. To keep things at a factory standard, I'm applying a bare metal seam sealer inside and outside of the arch, covering all the welded and grinded areas. It will hide the evidence of any work that was done, and most importantly, it'll protect the metal from rock chips that would eventually turn into rust, masking off about an inch inside and out, cleaning with the greaser, then finally applying the seam sealer. With a good amount laid down, I used an acid brush to spread it evenly. I then brushed lines in the opposite direction to slightly resemble a factory look. I'm no Picasso, but let's pretend. Before the sealer begins to dry, I peel the tape off, revealing the similar to factory seam sealer look. If you wait too long to remove the tape, you'd have to cut it out with a razor blade, and it wouldn't look the same. After the 1 hour cure time, I sand the entire area using a red scuff pad. This area will be the inside of the new panels, exposed to whatever the tires decide to throw at it. It'll be very difficult to get paint in here once fiberglass is bonded in place. Painting it now is the only way to know everything is covered. For the time being, I'll spray some direct-to-metal paint in black. That way no bare metal is exposed. And before starting any bodywork, I'll be spraying chip guard inside the fiberglass, this area, and over the existing undercoating to seal the deal even further. Another step closer to the factory standard. Same deal with the fronts, except those will be taken off the car to do so. I can't believe it, but it's finally time for the bonding process. Beginning the prep work by scuffing the intersection, more obsessive cleaning, then masking the inside segment with purple tape, and removing the green tape, which is the path for the panel bond. Using the belt sander and the very aggressive 36 grit, grinding all the paint off, followed by more scuffing to ensure mechanical adhesion. I then realized that I should have scuffed the entire fender before any of this. It's the only way to guarantee that everything is biting on to sanding scratches. So I removed the yellow tape and stepped out the 36 grit sanding marks, just to be safe. When it comes to stuff like this, I like to compare it to opposite extremes. Anything that is unsanded is like grabbing onto the middle of a massive flat sheet of glass, versus an aggressively sanded surface which is like grabbing onto a jagged rock wall. Mechanical adhesion. With the fronts mostly prepped, I completely forgot about those brackets that I had to make. Using a door skin that was destined for the dumpster, and creating templates from my good friend, tape, I cut and trimmed 2 brackets for the front, and 2 brackets for the rear, similar to how I shaved the antenna, but riveting them in place rather than welding makes things a bit easier if I ever had to replace these fenders, but let's hold off from imagining those thoughts. Moving on to the final portion of prep work before bonding the panels together. More or less repeating the same procedure that I've done to the car, masking the area to be bonded, but this time sanding with 180 grit rather than 36 grit. Removing too much material will only weaken the panels. And once again, cleaning. And for the magical glue, I'll be using 3M's panel bonding adhesive, 08115. A 2-part epoxy adhesive that contains glass beads to control the thickness of the bond line. It's intended for outer body panels, non-structural, of course. Steel, aluminum, and composites, like fiberglass. So it's perfect for this job. Reading the TDS, or technical data sheet, I've got a 90-minute work time, which is a long time. But it's still best to only work on one corner at a time, because you never know. To make things easier on myself, I lay out all the new screws paired with washers. These screws are still the way to go for this process. You don't want to clamp the panels too tight with panel bond. Not that I could use clamps in this situation. The screws would strip before the possibility of over tightening, and the washers just create a larger surface area to keep things flat. Just like any other two-part product, to make sure the two parts are mixed properly, it's important to draw a quarter-sized amount of adhesive before applying any to the panel. With all the preparation complete, I start the clock. I applied it the same exact way as a seam sealer. And forcing the adhesive into the panel with a brush. With the extra step of applying one more bead of adhesive on top of the brushed on material. This ensures that the panel bond is forced into both sides when screwed into place. And then doing the exact same process on the original fenders. They say, trust the process. It's not necessary to add the extra bead to both panels, but I like to have a peace of mind. It'll just be a bigger mess to clean up later. It also would have been a lot cleaner to remove the yellow tape after the panels have been mounted. However, with the outline tape removed, it was a bit stressful trying to find the mounting points, which is why it's so important to give yourself the extra time. Imagine if the adhesive started to dry before getting the work done. No good. With all the hardware screwed in, I took a brush to the excess squeeze out to cover all the bare metal and to protect from any corrosion. Double checked my work, and that's time. With about an hour to spare per corner, which is good to know. I feel like I can relax a bit on the rear corners. This time around marking the outline of the panel, so I know where to step out the sanding scratches. I'm really getting into it. After riveting the rear brackets and wiping the area clean, it's timer time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm concerned on the rear staying in place, trusting the panel bond. So I didn't hold back on over applying the adhesive. But on the passenger rear, the tube was running low, so I had to take it easy, and I definitely went overboard on the driver's side. I have to compensate for that section that I overcut, using 3 full tubes altogether. Brushing it has this mesmerizing glistening effect that melts away in a flash. It's quite nice. I don't know if it was the heat that day, but when it was time to install the driver's side rear, I really couldn't find the mounting points. Things got messy. Bingo. And for that area that I overcut, I'm using the aluminum tape to secure it in place. If I were to screw it in, it would probably over tighten it, changing the shape of the arch. On the insides, I brushed all the squeeze out back up to the fiberglass, and then made some finger paintings. Finger paintings aside, the hard work is officially done. The clamp time was to be 4 hours, and a cure time of 24 hours. I took it a step further and went on vacation. I'm no influencer, but let's pretend. And the whole time I kept thinking if the procedure went well. As soon as I returned, I wasted no time and began removing the screws. For the most part, the screws came out pretty easy, but a few had panel bond on the tips, preventing them from coming out. So I had to yank them out with pliers, like pulling teeth. When it came to the washers, they didn't want to come out without a bit of force, so I chiseled them out, which was a bit of fun. I wasn't concerned with the fronts holding, but it was a good feeling. And now for the rears. I started with the passenger side since it gave me the least amount of issues. And for a bit of relief, they remained bonded. I think I'm finally getting excited to start the bodywork. And last but not least, it's time for the final boss. The driver's side rear, the side that gave me the most concern. And what I was not expecting was the screws to not come out, which is a result of going overboard with the panel bond. The first 5 that I attempted didn't budge, which sucks. I really had somewhere to be that day. I could have easily grinded the heads off, but then I'm stuck with the screw remains on the inside, which is not a factory finish. I even tried removing all the excess panel bond around the heads, but no luck, so I proceeded to drill them out. Unfortunately, I was being impatient, which resulted in breaking the drill bit. There's always something. And it had me thinking. But instead, I grinded the heads off. I'll deal with the inside remains another day. With the heads removed and the washers tapped out, I grinded what was left of the screws on the outside. It's definitely not going to be easy getting to the inside of these due to where they're located. Some of the washers were so bonded that they removed the gel coat from the fiberglass. At least the fiberglass remained intact. And finally, removing the aluminum tape, which did the job well. With the final bottom screws removed, that's enough abuse for today. The fiberglass panels are now one with the car. I'm still used to the instant gratification of painting, revealing something beautiful the moment you're finished. But doing this type of work is a slow burn, and knowing that they will last will be the most gratifying. A lot of work so far, but far from finished. When I'm done with this car, it'll have the body of a 500e, but it's not a 500e, it's an E320, and that's something I'll never pretend. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, if you really like what I'm doing here, just subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm.